Greenland, the largest island in the world, a frozen, nearly uninhabited territory lost between the Arctic and the North Atlantic. For decades, almost no one truly cared about it. But today, this island sits at the center of a confrontation that could redefine the global geopolitical balance. Washington is ramping up pressure. Donald Trump multiplies public statements, Denmark summons ambassadors, Europe deploys troops. And in the middle of all this, 56,000 Greenlanders watch the most coveted territories on the planet. We will examine possible scenarios from the most diplomatic to the most extreme, and we will see why this crisis could fracture NATO and reshape the future of European defense. Stay with me. What's at stake in Greenland goes far beyond this icy island. Let's start with the basics. Greenland spans 2 million square kilometers, the largest island on Earth. But 80% of its surface is covered by a permanent ice sheet, entirely uninhabitable zones. The ice-free area represents about 20% of the territory, roughly the size of Norway or Sweden. 56,000 inhabitants, that's it. And nearly all of them live in the southwest, where the climate is least hostile. To give you an idea, that's fewer people than a mid-sized French city. But don't be mistaken, it's not the population that interests Washington, it's not even the land itself, it's what it represents, its geography, its resources, its strategic potential. And since the beginning of his term, Donald Trump hasn't bothered to hide it. Greenland is vital to U.S. national security, not a suggestion, not a hypothesis, a certainty, an absolute necessity. The 2025 National Security Strategy is explicit. The American objective is to control, directly or indirectly, the entirety of the Western Hemisphere. Greenland is an integral part of that plan. Trump argues that the island is essential to counter Russian and Chinese influence in the Arctic. At first glance, the argument is plausible. Russia is strengthening its military presence in the region. China is multiplying investments in research stations. The Arctic is becoming a new theater of great power rivalry, but there's something else. Something far less talked about, but likely the real driver of this diplomatic offensive: resources. Greenland is rich in critical minerals, rare earths essential for high-tech manufacturing, batteries, and military equipment. Yet as of 2026, only 2 mines are active: a gold mine in the south and an anorthosite mine in the west. That's it. Untapped deposits are believed to be colossal. And in a world of increasingly contested supply chains, whoever controls these deposits gains massive leverage. First come, first served. Only the strongest wins. That's the brutal reality behind the rhetoric of national security. But there's a problem. Several, actually. 85% of Greenlanders oppose joining the United States. 78% of Danes reject any sale. 41% of Danes U.S. will act. The question is how and at what cost? To understand the current situation, we must go back a few months. Late 2025, the White House appoints Jeff Landry as special envoy for Greenland, a strong signal that immediately escalates tensions with Denmark. Copenhagen summons the U.S. ambassador, a measured, diplomatic, almost timid response. Trump doesn't do timid. Early January 2026, military operation in Venezuela. The U.S. intervenes directly, quickly, effectively. Trump triumphantly declares that the action proves America's willingness to act decisively to defend its strategic interests. Clear message: what happened in Venezuela can happen elsewhere. On January 9, 2026, Trump crosses a new line. He claims Denmark has no legal claim over Greenland, arguing that landing there 500 years ago does not equal ownership, a deliberately provocative remark, especially coming from an American. Because if that logic were applied to the U.S. itself, not much of its territorial legitimacy would remain. But Trump isn't seeking coherence. He wants reaction, division, chaos. Every statement, every provocation aims to trigger waves of responses in Greenland, Denmark, and across Europe, to create fractures, to exploit disagreements, and it works. Washington threatens to impose tariffs on European states that oppose the Greenland project, economic coercion, thinly veiled blackmail. The goal? push Greenland to open direct talks with the US without Denmark. Bypass Copenhagen, create a bilateral relationship that marginalizes the Danish kingdom entirely. Under this pressure, Denmark reacts. It asks Europe to deploy troops to Greenland as a deterrent, and there we reach the heart of the problem. Can Europe really oppose the United States? Is it willing to risk direct confrontation to defend Greenland? Does it even have the means? The outcome is uncertain, and that uncertainty gives Trump a major advantage. But to understand why the situation is so complex, we must look at Greenland's legal and political status. Greenland is not a simple Danish colony. It is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, governed by the 2009 Self-Government Act, which grants real power to Nuuk over domestic affairs, the economy, natural resources, justice, police, and social services. Denmark retains 3 sovereign domains: defense, foreign policy, and currency. Crucially, Greenlanders hold the recognized right to self-determination, meaning independence via referendum is legally possible after negotiation with Denmark. Greenland's political life revolves around a long-term trajectory toward independence. But there's a constraint: money. The island relies on a $600 million annual Danish grant, funding public services, education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Without it, independence is difficult, maybe impossible in the short term. Greenland's leaders want independence, but first need to develop their own revenue base, centered on mining and energy. And this is where the U.S. sees leverage: massive investments, technology transfers, access to American markets, in exchange for privileged access to resources and an expanded military presence. Greenlanders reject foreign interference, including from the U.S. They fear replacing one dependency with another, but geography is destiny. Greenland holds one of the most strategic positions on Earth. The U.S. has had a consistent interest for decades, never stronger than today. Why? Because Greenland's geography offers major advantages in defense, intelligence, and economic control. It overlooks trans-Arctic routes, it monitors Russian missile trajectories, it protects undersea cables, it enables naval projection in the North Atlantic. The U.S. presence already exists: Thule Air Base since 1951. Radar, missile warning systems, a few hundred personnel. Washington says not enough. Melting ice opens new maritime routes. Russia and China want influence there. China actively invests in Arctic stations and projects. The U.S. wants to counter all of it and secure access to critical minerals. Trump accuses Denmark of failing to protect the island from Russian and Chinese influence, justifying U.S. control, but the U.S. already has nearly unlimited access at Thule. It could expand its presence today without changing Greenland's legal status. So why insist? Because security concerns mask economic motives: direct access to strategic minerals. Historically, American attempts to buy Greenland failed in 1867, 1910, 1946, and 2019. Denmark refused every time. This time the context is different. The narrative fits a U.S. doctrine of hemispheric dominance, where power supersedes consent. If the U.S. acts before Trump's term ends, several scenarios emerge. 1. Negotiated agreement. A deal between the U.S., Denmark, and Greenland balancing American security needs with Greenlandic aspirations. U.S. investment in exchange for expanded military presence and access to resources. Least damaging scenario, but politically toxic for Denmark. 2. Influence toward independence. The U.S. strengthens direct ties with Nuuk, funding, investment, economic incentives, encouraging independence from Denmark. Denmark would lose its Arctic influence overnight. It would lose future access to critical minerals worth potentially hundreds of billions. Its government would face internal political upheaval. For the EU, U.S. dominance in Greenland would deepen strategic fragmentation. Sanctioning the U.S. would be impossible due to lack of unanimity. Europe would look divided and weak. Macron calls for an EU anti-coercion instrument, but likely without broad support, including from Germany. Europe remains divided between unconditional Atlanticists and proponents of strategic autonomy. Denmark's room for maneuver is extremely limited. It must choose the least bad option. Perhaps the least damaging path is negotiating an expanded U.S. presence at Thule, preserving minimal sovereignty while avoiding total loss. Another counterintuitive option: accelerate Greenlandic independence before the U.S. shapes it. 85% of Greenlanders oppose annexation. Denmark could leverage that sentiment with EU support if EU support materializes, but Europe is busy with Ukraine, divided and weakened. Trump did not choose his timing at random. Greenland is becoming the symbol of a new geopolitical era, one where post-World War II rules are breaking down, where international law gives way to power politics, and where even close allies may find themselves in confrontation. The coming months will be decisive. Either Denmark and Europe salvage their influence, or Greenland falls permanently into the American orbit. If it does, the consequences will be profound for Arctic power balances, for EU credibility, and for the transatlantic relationship, because one question will inevitably follow: after Greenland, what's next?